Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. Very excited for today's show. We got none other than Chris Larsen on the line. Chris, welcome to the show.
Brian, great to see you. How you doing?
Doing really, really well. It was really awesome meeting you. For the listeners, we were at an event in Tampa. Gosh, it's been a month actually, a month ago. And so finally
Yeah,
connected for the podcast. So great meeting you, man.
great to meet you too, and I'm excited to talk and hopefully add some value for your audience here today.
Yep. And I remember you were one of the speakers at the event. Remind me, it's in my
Yeah,
notes somewhere. What did you speak on there?
it's one of the groups that I'm
Mhm.
fortunate enough to be a coach with. I forget what I was actually asked to speak on, but I talked about how it's important in today's age of
Mhm.
digitization and AI to really be authentic and
Mhm.
to connect with people and ultimately learn really what's important to people. And after spending a couple decades in sales,
Mhm.
Brian, we have a product, we have a widget in our hand, and we're like, hey,
Mhm.
let me tell you all about this thing. But my talk was really about the point that what's important is who you're speaking to and what's important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a lesson I've learned over and over and over
Yeah.
again. Hopefully one of these days it just sticks, but yeah. Yeah, what was
Yeah.
fun about that, I bought those tickets last minute and I showed up, and for everybody
Yeah.
listening, it was the fully funded group. I think
Yeah.
Sam Silverman's lead of that group.
Sam.
But right after I walked in, Sam approached me and said, "Hey, we got room on one of the panels for another guest. Would you be on the panel?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, absolutely." So anyway, it ended up being a really good trip
Yeah.
for me as well. Unplanned
Yeah.
speaking event, but
Well, and you did, and you were fantastic, which led us to this event because we had a conversation, and
yep,
here we are. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how
Yeah.
you got started in multifamily.
Yeah. So, Brian, it's interesting. We were chatting a little bit before the show, and it kind of brought back,
Mhm.
kind of some turning points in my life. And one of those was when I was in college,
Mhm.
and I bought my first property at 21. And I did that because I was at Virginia Tech, and
Mhm.
that's actually a real diploma on the wall from Virginia Tech. I went to Virginia Tech not to get a degree in engineering. I went to ride my bike. I said, "Hey,
Mhm.
I want to go to school. I know being a professional cyclist doesn't pay well, so I want to become a professional cyclist, but let me get a
Mhm.
degree that's actually going to give me an education that I can build on."
Yeah.
And I got a couple years into that degree, and I was racing my bike. I was
Mhm.
actually quite like successful from an amateur level, and I was on track to go pro. And my team actually did go pro, but when they
Nice.
did that, I stepped away from the sport. And the reason was my best friend had passed away. He was my
Ooh.
training partner, he was my roommate in college. And as I mentioned, he was my best friend. And after kind of contemplating, I said, really, is my life really meant to train to ride my bike around in a circle?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I said, there's more to it than this. And
Mhm.
I said, I don't want to have regrets. I don't want to regret, training 30 hours a week to ride my bike around in circles and miss all these things in life.
Mhm.
And as I thought about it, I said, you have to have financial independence to do that.
Yeah.
So that event led me to buying my first property and choosing real estate as my path towards financial independence,
Mhm.
which that first little townhouse that I paid $90,000 for in Blacksburg, Virginia,
Mhm.
ultimately led to my first investment in 2013 in a multifamily syndication as a passive investor, which put me on the track to financial independence just a couple years later. And then ultimately here talking to you today.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got lots of good wisdom to share along the way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
let's start with asking this question. What were some of the challenges you had up
Yeah.
front getting into, I know you've done more than just apartments. So let's just
Yeah.
say commercial real estate in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think it's important to note, we can look back and say, oh,
Mhm.
look at all these things that have gone well and what's happened. But this month, which this is really kind of wild, I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about this right now. This month marks 25 years since I bought that first property. So if
Wow.
you're listening and you're thinking like, oh, wow, like Brian and Chris, they got it all figured out. It takes a while sometimes to do that.
Hmm.
And I think that's my first point, Brian,
Yeah.
is that real estate is a get rich slow process, and it's as much of a mindset as it is a process.
Yeah.
So you have to say, hey, I'm committed to doing this. It's like being in a committed relationship with your partner or
Hmm.
your spouse. It's like being a parent. It's like being in a career. You just
Yeah.
don't jump into something and magically everything happens. Actually, it's the failures that lead to the successes. So the faster you
Hmm.
fail and do that, the better. I think the first part is, when you're that young and you buy your
Hmm.
first property, there's a lot of hurdles. It's like, well, how do you get credit? So I had my mom co-sign on the loan. It only was like $3,000 down. So I was able to come up with that money. I was always pretty intrepid and entrepreneurial. So I was able to make money and figure out that.
Gosh,
But
pre 2007, that's what I
oh
put down on my
man,
first investment property was
yeah.
$3,000. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Oh, and you could literally, they're like, wait, hang on. Okay.
You got a
We got a
pulse.
pulse. We got a pulse. All right, cool. You got a loan. But you could only get so many loans before you ran out of
Right.
money. So the first, after figuring out how to buy that first property and have my mom co-sign and do that, and then actually bought another property, a couple more, but then I ran out of capital. So
Hmm.
I had to get a quote unquote real job to get some money. So I had this idea of being an investor, as Robert Kiyosaki said. I picked that I quadrant, but I had to be an employee to make money to become an investor. So, that challenge, again, it's
Hmm.
okay to take a pathway to get to your ultimate destination. And,
Yeah.
sometimes, overcome some things that maybe isn't where you want to end up, but it's the journey that gets there.
Yeah.
So had to get somebody to help me out on that first property, then had to
Hmm.
find out, the capital. And then after doing that, then I had to really focus on time management systems and hiring people to help manage those properties
Yeah.
as I set off on my professional career as well.
Yeah. Something you said a little while ago, you mentioned it's like raising kids, and it is one
Yeah.
of those things where, I just had a 9-year-old walk out of the house to gymnastics, and
Yeah.
I mean, she's a
Yeah.
really awesome gymnast, but she's taken three
Yeah.
year to do it, and it's
Yeah.
just kind
Yeah.
of and even with kids, 18 years they're out of the house and they still know nothing. But it is very similar. It's very much
Yeah.
a all and get rich slow. That's exactly what it is. Get
Yeah.
rich
Yeah.
slow. So
Yeah.
well, awesome. So, let's talk about, how your progression went. Once you got into commercial real estate, what type of assets did you start buying and how did that change over time?
Yeah. So again, I think it's important to note that I had those residential properties. I talk about this in my
Mhm.
book, which I'm
Yeah,
happy to share with your
absolutely. Yeah,
audience how
please
they
do.
can get a free copy at our website, nextlevelincome.com. I got up to my first step in my plan was buy enough residential properties, have
Mhm.
$10,000 a month coming in once I
Yeah.
paid off the loans. But then what happened was my mother actually passed away in 2011, and we're actually coming up real quick on that anniversary here as we're recording this in December. I kind of stepped back after my mom passed away,
Yeah.
and I did an inventory of my life. My two boys were born. I was married. I had kind of by all accounts a successful career, which is
Yeah.
interesting if you look at the parallel to my successful cycling career.
Hmm.
And I was like, what could I be doing differently? What could I be doing
Hmm.
better? And when I looked at my investments, I realized I was getting like a 7% return on my residential properties, Brian,
Hmm.
which was like 4% after tax
Yeah.
on my equity. And I was like, this isn't good. My other degree is in portfolio management. I have an MBA in finance. And I'm like, I have an MBA in finance and I'm getting a 4% after tax return. I'm like, this
Come
is
on. Yeah,
embarrassing. Yeah.
exactly.
And I was telling this story to
Hmm.
somebody at a business meeting, which I was at with my wife, who was starting her own architecture practice at the time.
Hmm.
And he said, have you considered investing in apartments? And I was like, well, it's like kind of the same thing. He's like, well, you should talk to my friend who
Hmm.
syndicates apartments. And that led to my first investment in apartment syndication. And I more than doubled my pre tax return.
Yeah.
It was passive. I was like, wow, this is like crazy. And I'll never
Yeah.
forget my friend Chad. He's a friend now, and he said, people will crawl on hands and knees over glass to get to these sorts of investments.
Hmm.
When you tell them about it. And I was like, yeah, I was just like, I couldn't wait to invest in one of these deals. So that, it took me about a year though, Brian, to kind of educate myself. I'm a numbers
Hmm.
guy, so
Yeah.
I like to take my time and figure things out. So it took me about a year of looking, and even then, I looked at two different operators and I had $100,000. I split that investment between two different operators. And I wanted to
Hmm.
learn as much as I could between them. And funny enough, one of those investments actually underwent a capital call, and it was in Houston, Texas, which got
Hmm.
hit by a hurricane and had all these issues. I learned a ton about, investing, the highs and lows, through that one investment, which is, stuck with me,
Hmm.
for over a decade now.
Yeah. I just right before you logged on, I was writing my LinkedIn post for later this week about a deal in Houston that just went
Mm,
bad, but
yeah,
hurricane damage and all that other fun stuff. But yeah, I
there you
mean,
go.
fortunately, that's the first deal I've ever lost money on. So one out of 26 isn't bad, but
No, yeah,
not bad. So we'll see. Well, cool. Well, appreciate you sharing that. That's
yeah,
good stuff there. One thing that you mentioned is, you mentioned your return on the single family home, but you said
yeah,
return on equity. You know,
yes,
I
yeah.
like that. I like that metric. Can you explain what that metric is and why that's important?
Yeah, and this is sometimes we forget, like we throw around
Hmm.
like ROI and ROE and cash on
Yeah.
cash and IRR, and you kind of get lost in the matrix of
Yeah.
terms and acronyms and all this. So this is one of my favorites though. So
Mine too.
yeah, so when you look at the stock market, for
Hmm.
instance, one of my favorite sayings is if you wouldn't buy a stock today and you own it, you should sell it.
Hmm.
And we don't think about that often enough as real estate investors. And that's what I think return on equity does. So let's take an example. So that
Yeah.
first property I bought, it was $90,000. I put $3,000 down.
Hmm.
Let's say it goes up in value $90,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So I take my $3,000 investment and it's like, wow, that's a tremendous return, like 30x return, right? If
30x.
you sell it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huge.
But let's say I was making $3,000 a year after
Hmm.
investing $3,000. That's 100% cash on cash return.
Hmm.
Well, now let's say a few years later, or 5 years later, whatever the time is, when it went from 90 to 180,000, I'm now making $6,000. You may say, Chris, that's great. You doubled your cash on cash return.
Hmm.
However, I now have my I have let's say $100,000 in equity now. I'm just
Yeah.
rounding up because let's say I had some some principal pay down during that period. For those of you that are numbers guys like me. So you
Hmm.
say, well, wait a minute. Now you have 100,000 of equity, Chris. You're actually making 6% on your equity, not
Yeah.
100% or 200% on your equity. And that's the thing. If you could sell the property today,
Yep.
what would your cash on cash return be? And that's what I did because I said, hey, let's say I liquidated my portfolio, what would I actually be getting?
Yep.
And I think as a real estate investor, you have to look at it like the stock market and say, what if I move this money into a different investment and
Hmm.
did that? And what's nice is in the stock market, you can sell quickly. In real
Yeah.
estate, you can't, which I think is good. However, in real estate, you can do 1031 exchanges.
Hmm.
And I actually did a 1031 exchange with that property. And I
Yeah.
was able to really leverage up that investment by doing it.
Nice. Yeah, that return on equity metric, I had a similar light bulb moment. Probably 2016, 2017, I realized I had a handful of single family homes, and based on my initial investment, I was making good returns, but
Yeah.
based off the equity, I was making single digits.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's actually one of the contributing factors to me getting into multifamily was I'm only making, single digit returns on this equity here. I might as well pull it out and put it into something else. And I was
Yeah.
including tax advantages because there were
Yeah.
some tax advantages. I was including cash flow. I was including the principal pay down. I'm a numbers guy just like you. I was including a moderate amount of appreciation every year, and I was still,
Yeah.
it was like 8 or 9%, but
Yeah.
still wasn't
Which
a fun.
isn't bad, but it's not
No.
great. Yeah. Yeah.
But when you could park it into a multifamily deal and make twice that, or in my case, become a sponsor and use that to, earnest monies and everything else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to remind myself every time I see one of these properties that I sold and what the prices are, I have to remind myself that I did what I needed to do at the time. So,
Yeah.
but
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, well, cool, cool. So what's your portfolio look like right now and what's going well and what kind of challenges are you seeing?
Yeah. So we're fast forwarding here, Brian.
Hmm.
So I went from a passive investor, back in like 2013 to we syndicated our first apartment deal in 2016. And my first partner was actually somebody that I introduced to that same sponsor operator that we invested with. And then we bought five properties down in the Atlanta market, Atlanta MSA, down there, and then went from there and started to move into some other markets
Hmm.
as well. At this point, we're approaching $2 billion in total assets
Wow.
that we've purchased with our partners. And we still have the majority of our assets in
Hmm.
multifamily, but we have some self-storage, mobile home parks, as well as car washes. And some other kind of fun little deals that we do around Asheville, North Carolina, where I live as well. But one of the things is that, I mentioned my book earlier. People say, well, Chris, you're a multifamily guy. Like, it doesn't make sense for you to get into self-storage or mobile home parks. If you read my book and you think about it,
Hmm.
I'm a demographics guy. I got into
Hmm.
the medical device space because of the
Yeah.
demographics behind that with the baby boomers. I got into multifamily but because of the demographics behind the millennials and the shortage in housing that we had. And those are the big fundamental shifts and long-term trends that I
Yeah.
follow. So I love value add deals, Brian. I
Hmm.
love deals that have cash flow, as you mentioned, appreciation, depreciation. And I look for demographic trends, and then I look for real estate deals that have those.
Yeah.
We've kind of talked about, as you scale, some of the challenges. One is scaling
Hmm.
your team. I think that's the
Yeah.
biggest challenge is people.
That's been
I've
my
had
toughest one. So my ears are perking up right now.
yeah.
Yeah. Here we
It's
go.
like, we could talk about like, oh, there was this deal and like the
Hmm.
hurricane came through and blew the roof off. And it's like, okay, it's kind of, what do you learn from that? You learn that there's hurricanes and you have to plan for that.
Yeah.
But, you can only do so much planning. And, you say, okay, well, maybe you diversify out of a market that has hurricanes or you have some additional reserves. But the biggest thing to me is the people component. And I've had great
Hmm.
partners and I've had really horrible partners. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You need to align with people that have the same philosophies, but even more so the same values as you. And I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing. And I could apply that to, the people I hired when I was running medical device
Hmm.
distributorships. I could apply that to, small businesses that we've had as well as our investment portfolios that we've had as well. So I'll give an analogy. We built the home that I'm in right now. My office
Hmm.
is on the third floor. My wife's an architect. And people say, well, how did you pick the builder? Like Chris, you're in real
Hmm.
estate, all these builders around,
Yeah.
your city and your wife works with them. What I tell them, Brian, is I picked the builder based on the long-term relationship I had with him and his
Hmm.
company, but also on how I knew how he handled bad situations. And
Oh,
what I
that's
mean
key.
is,
Yes.
yes. So when everything's going well, and look, I know you can relate to this. It's like you have a deal that's going well, and all your like everybody loves you, right?
Hmm.
Something doesn't go well, there are people that get really upset. But then there's other investors that say, "Hey, I get it, and what are we going to do to work through this?"
Yeah.
And I knew because I'd built spec homes with this builder, homes that we'd build and then sell with this
Hmm.
builder, that I knew how he would handle situations that wouldn't go well. And I said, I know that something's not going to go well when we're building the house or after the house is
Yeah.
built. And I want to know that I can deal with this. And there was
Hmm.
another builder that we interviewed. We got it down to three. And this guy like kind of lost it, at
Hmm.
one point when we were talking and
Yeah.
and I was like, there's no way that that guy's going to handle this situation well. So I think that's the biggest thing is that, again, you want to align with people that have the same values, principles, philosophies that you do, but also
Yeah.
that you can work with them when something isn't going well. And I think
Yeah.
that's a real life lesson. And that doesn't mean that people don't get upset or they don't get angry or they're perfect all the time,
Hmm.
but they know that when something doesn't go your way and when something doesn't go your way, that you're going to get through it
Yeah.
even if
You
you're
can
not your
still
best
handle it.
self.
You don't shut down. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, that's the number one thing I can say.
Yeah. You see the back of my, behind my screen, I got a lot of, former stuff. Oops, that side for my
Yeah.
military, background, but
Yes.
that's the same thing there. I think that's
Yeah.
one huge lesson, military
Yeah.
lesson applied
Yeah.
to business is we would specifically put people into tough situations in training
Mm.
to
Yeah.
try to weed that out, to try to figure
Yeah.
that out beforehand,
Yeah.
who does well under stress, who doesn't.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
mean, the military would try to weed the people out who didn't do well
Hmm.
under stress, but that's a
Yeah.
little different. And unfortunately, you don't see that as much in, the business we're in until something really goes bad. So it's hard to pick people based on that one metric,
Yeah.
until
It
you've
is.
you've gone a couple of laps around the track with them.
You know, God bless you, and thank you to anybody that's listening that's been in the service. And I used to hire a lot of people in the med device
Mhm.
space that were in the military, and there's that, and
Yeah.
I would also say elite athletes are similar, way
Yes.
different, way easier to be an athlete
Hmm.
than be in the military, in my opinion. But as an athlete,
Hmm.
you lose a lot, you get injured, you have issues with teammates and coaches, and stuff doesn't go well. So you learn how to win, but you also learn how to fail, and
Yeah.
that's even more important.
You learn when you drop it, you drop the ball, you got to get back in the
Yeah,
huddle and
yeah,
run another play. I
that's
mean,
right, that's
my
right.
my
Yeah.
acquisitions guy is a former collegiate athlete and
Mm.
played tight end
Yeah.
for a major school. I'm not going to say which school because it's not one I particularly like, but yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's something I thought about a lot,
yeah,
college athletes,
mm,
especially the better ones, the ones who've learned how to succeed would be
yeah,
perfect. Well, they're probably pretty good at anything they do,
yeah.
but that's a no-brainer there. Yeah, a lot of good stuff there. And I'll say from my experience, we talked about values, we talked about
Yeah.
alignment. The first company that I formed, there was four partners. And up front, we had, very, very similar goals. We all wanted to get into the space, you know, and that was really easy. We were all just pushing, pushing, pushing. But what we found over time, 2, 3 years later, is, our long-term goals didn't really align anymore, and at that point,
Interesting. Yeah.
it actually took one partner to point that out and just say, hey, look, this is
Mm.
working now, but eventually it's not because you
Yeah.
guys are marching this direction, you guys are marching this direction. And he had the courage to actually say, we need to figure this out or, you know, cut
Yeah.
ties. But yeah, I mean that's everything you said. Those are things that I learned maybe a little bit the hard way, but
Yeah. That's usually
I
how we
mean,
learn, right?
yeah, we learned it.
Yeah.
And I mean, long story short, we made a decent amount of money, gave our investors back a decent amount of money, and we're still cordial,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
no bad blood. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, all right. Well, we've been talking for almost 30 minutes now. So I do have three questions to wrap things up.
Oh
And
boy,
I've
here
got
we
a
go.
big smile on my face right now because I was giving Chris the heads up earlier that I'd ask three questions at the end, and I couldn't remember what the three questions were, but I do remember them now. Question
Rock and
number
roll.
one, what's next for you? And that's the one I couldn't
Yeah.
remember about 30 minutes ago.
Yeah. So, and you're not stating business or personal, any of that. So I love it because it
Yep.
gives me a little open door. So look, I've actually had a really, really tough kind of end of the year, Brian. I lost my sister. We had Hurricane Helene hit our
Yep.
area here, which has had a lot of business disruptions and community. And I've seen a lot of different challenges. My stepfather was just diagnosed with dementia, moved in with us. So what's next for me is 2025, and I'm kind of getting a mental reset here.
Yeah.
And then we were just chatting before the show. I'm going to be bringing my older son out. He's got his spring break, and we're going to be skiing for
Mhm.
for a couple weeks out in Salt Lake City. So I'm going to be balancing
Yeah.
that. So I'm really excited about that. I'm very fortunate, despite all these challenges, to have a lot of wonderful things in my life. But yeah, that's what's next.
Awesome. Awesome. And I like that you went for the more not just strictly business approach either, because guess what? Business is important, but it's not
Yeah.
the only thing.
Yeah,
So
that's
appreciate
right.
that.
And real quick, like I think
Yeah.
that's a great point you just made. Multifamily investments, making money. I think this is all fun. It's a blast. Like I think it's as much fun as like winning a game or a race, but it's ultimately a vehicle to help you do what you want to do and spend time
Hmm.
doing what you want to do
Yeah.
and doing that. So thank you for pointing that
Yeah.
out.
I love it. Vehicle. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a question for you because we talked about your book earlier. How can people get a copy of your book?
Yeah. And again, if you're listening, grab a free copy, nextlevelincome.com. I
Yep.
don't have as many episodes of our podcast up as Brian does, but
Mhm.
we've got about half as many up at the website. And if you click on the book link and you put your address in, we'll send you a free copy.
Yep. And testament to that, mine came in the mail a couple days ago. It's got like the Monopoly hotel and houses on the front cover.
That's
I haven't
right. There you
opened. There it
go.
is. There it is. So
Yeah.
if you're not watching this on YouTube, go to YouTube right now, watch it, and you can see the beautiful color, the cover. But nextlevelincome.com. And he was actually talking, Chris was talking about it during his presentation at the Fully Funded. I think I filled the form out right there. So yeah, I appreciate it. And I'll be diving into that one over the Christmas break. But all right. Next question, and that's if you had to give advice to somebody who's just starting out, what would that advice be?
Yeah, so we covered a lot of different things, Brian. But when I look back, there was a couple points that stood out. And I always look back and I'm like, oh man, like I remember sitting with a gentleman and he wrote like one of the big books on real estate. And he
Mhm.
was just outside of Blacksburg, Virginia. And I sat down with him. He's like, oh, you should go into like property management. He gave me all this advice. I didn't really take it. I look back now, I'm like, I should have at least incorporated that into my pathway. What you should do when you start off is you can go and make all the mistakes that Brian and I did, or
Mhm.
you can find somebody that's made the mistakes. You might go the same direction, but you might get the shortcuts.
Mhm.
Find somebody that's done what you want to do and ask them for advice. Hire them as a coach or mentor.
Mhm.
And what's wild is I still do this today. I had some a young kid, he's a freshman in college, reaches out to me on LinkedIn. I did
Mhm.
a free coaching call with him. I talked to him. What I said was, I said, hey, man, congratulations. Like, thank you for reaching out to me. And he's like, well, no, thank you. When you find somebody that has achieved what you want to achieve and you reach out to them, chances are they want to share what they've done
Yeah.
because they will say, wait a minute, hey, Brian, I can help you take a shortcut to success. And
Mhm.
what I always say to those usually young individuals that reach out to me is I only ask for one thing. Just let me know how it's going along the way
Yeah.
because it's really fun to do that. And on the flip
Yeah.
side, reach out for help, reach out to a coach or a mentor, but
Yeah.
also if you want to get ahead in life and you've had success, coach or mentor somebody else because I think you learn just as much on the other side of it as well.
Yeah. That's also a lesson I've learned many times. It's the let's see, the Navy medical. This is something that I heard from a friend who went through like a Navy medical field training, but they see one, they do one, they teach
Yeah.
one.
See one, do one, teach one. That's right.
See one, do one, teach one.
Yeah.
So whether it was an
Yeah.
IV or anything else, once you're
Yeah.
able to teach something, that's
Yeah.
where you get the real mastery, and
That's right. Yeah.
that's really helped me a lot along the way too. And
Absolutely.
incidentally, I just looked into another coaching program for 2025. I've done several in the past, and I can't say enough about finding coaches. Typically I
Absolutely.
find something I need help with, go out, find a coach that can help me with that, and boom, it costs money. Awesome. If it's
Yeah.
free, even better, but it
Yeah.
usually isn't. But
Yeah. Well, on that point, it shouldn't be. And I'll tell you what, I think if you're getting free coaching, sometimes you feel guilty about taking somebody's time.
yeah,
And if somebody's not paying you, there's probably a subconscious thing there where you don't lean in
yeah,
as much. So if you're coaching, don't feel guilty about charging. And if you're
yeah.
finding somebody for a mentor or a coach, you probably get what you pay for.
What I found is, the coaching relationships where there's not money transacted,
Yeah.
it's kind of a I've got time now. I mean, you don't really dedicate
Yeah.
time to it, right? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
it may work out, but if things get busy, what's the first thing that drops off your plate, a lot of times. But I was helping some people out, just kind of ad hoc, people who'd call me, and I'm happy to do that once or twice. But what I realized, and I did start charging people for it, what I realized is if I really wanted to help people, it had to be persistent. It couldn't be a one-off coaching call.
No.
It had to be persistent. And then I
Yeah.
started thinking, okay, if I really want to help people and I have to make this persistent, the only way I can guarantee that I'm going to show up every time is to get paid for it. So,
That's
but
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what went through my mind. I think it's true. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
all right. Last question for you, and this may be a little bit of overlap with the book question, but how can listeners learn more about you?
Yeah. Again, we try to put everything we can up on our website,
Mhm.
nextlevelincome.com. We got the free book. We got the podcast that's free. We got blog articles that are free. Again, we want to provide as much value as possible. But if you want to learn more about what we're doing on the investment side, if you want to reach out and learn about some of our other stuff, first off, you can click on the investment link if you want to learn more about that, or you can reach out to me directly, Chris at nextlevelincome.com, Chris at nextlevelincome.com.
All right. And we'll put a link to the website, put a link to his email address in the show notes. So anybody who's listening, that's all you got to do. Don't worry about writing it down. For some reason, I just remembered the very first time I reached out to somebody that I heard on a podcast ended up going extremely well for me. I was running across a bridge that crossed the Potomac River in the DC area, sweaty as
Know
anything,
that area
trying
well,
to,
yeah.
listen to their email address and type it into my phone and everything else. You don't have to do that. Just, it's in the show notes. But anyway, Chris, thanks for coming on the show. Very much appreciate your time today.
Brian, great to see you. Thank you.
Wait, all right, thanks.